Did you know there were 86 commercial plane accidents last year? That's what I read in the airport lobby before I boarded my plane. Needless to say, it made me even more nervous. You know, it was my first time flying, and reading about airplane crashes wasn't really helping. I stopped for a slight moment before stepping in the plane with a shaky leg. The flight attendant flashed me a blinding white smile and asked me for my plane ticket. I gave it to her with some sweaty hands, and she looked at it and pointed me inside the cabin. My nerves were filling my legs with jittery energy, and the crap cabin did not help at all. I found my seat, and thankfully it was a window seat. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked around to make sure no one saw me. I didn't want anyone to laugh at me. I hurriedly sat down in my seat and took some deep breaths. My chest rose and fell, but my heart continued beating relentlessly in my chest. And the sweat, it just wouldn't stop forming on my forehead. I was pretty embarrassed, honestly. The hum of the plane engines filled the atmosphere a couple minutes later, and a lump formed in my throat as the plane accelerated. I could feel the pressure on my chest as the plane moved faster and faster. Just before the plane started to ascend, the front part of the plane went up and then fell again, causing a loud thud. God! I yelped as I heard the front of the plane hit the ground. A child behind me started to laugh before his mother shushed him. My face was flushed red with embarrassment. I shut my eyes tightly. I sensed the plane going higher and higher as the pressure in my head started to increase. My eardrums tightened and I was afraid the pressure was going to make my head explode. But nothing like that happened, though, and the plane stopped descending after a couple minutes and just started flying forward. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaky hands as my adrenaline rush wore off. The same flight attendant from earlier, she offered me a bottle and asked if I was okay. No, I'll just take the bottle. I stared at the white clouds from the window as the plane continued to soar in the air. Soon that got boring, though, and I was now more bored than nervous. Flying isn't so bad after all, I told myself as I started to look for a movie to watch on the screen in front of me. Instead, I opted out for some games and played those instead on the remote. They weren't exactly exciting games, but they kept me entertained for the next 30 minutes. Soon enough, the lights in the cabin were turned off with only a dim blue lighting filling the cabin. Most people tried to get some sleep in the cramped seats. I decided to do the same, as I really just wanted to pass the time. That was the worst decision I could have made. When I was just on the edge of sleep, I started to hear these faint whispers in the cabin. My half-asleep mind didn't register them, and I ended up just falling asleep. And that's the last thing I remember before I woke up. You see, I woke up naturally a couple hours later. I rubbed my tired eyes before looking around the cabin, and to my shock, it was completely empty. I blinked and rubbed my eyes again and looked around for anyone. The cabin was still dimly lit with the blue light, but it was completely empty. Like everyone had just vanished. A pit formed in my stomach and my mouth suddenly went dry. I got out of my seat and started walking down the aisle, moving my head side to side furiously to find someone. My fears were confirmed. There was no one in the cabin. I moved to the next area via the curtains, and once again, the plane was empty. I checked the toilets as well, and there was no one there. Maybe I slept through the landing, I thought, as my mind tried to rationalize the situation. It's ironic how in the most stressful situations, our first priority is to rationalize the situation, to find an explanation. I went to a window and pulled up the plastic window cover. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the dark sky, faint outlines of wispy clouds. Chills ran up my spine as my observation started to register. I was alone. I was all alone on a plane, 30,000 feet up in the air. I started running quickly to the pilot's cabin. I ran past multiple cabins separated by the curtains and the toilets. I ran, but all I saw on the other side of the separating curtains was another cabin. I was sweating profusely. My heart was scared rabbit trapped in my chest. No matter how far I ran, no matter how many cabins I crossed, I never reached the pilot's cabin. Every window showed the same dark sky and clouds. Every cabin was lit by the same dim blue lights. Every cabin had the same dark blue carpet. I collapsed. I collapsed in the middle of the aisle as I crossed my 30th seating cabin. I couldn't catch my breath. My clothes were wet with sweat, and the lump in my throat wouldn't go away. I needed to get out of this plane. Suddenly, I heard a low hum, different from the hum of the plane engine. I strained my ears. It held a melody or a rhythm or something. It sounded serene but sad. I looked around and I saw a woman sitting on a seat a couple rows ahead of me. I can only see the back of her head. I got up and walked towards her, desperate for help. I stopped in my tracks, though, when I saw what she was watching on her screen. It showed me, behind her, like there was a camera behind me and it was streaming to her screen. She stopped humming and turned her head around slowly. Her face turned the blood in my veins into ice. It was the flight attendant. She was the same flight attendant. Her eyes were bloodshot and her eyelids, they were missing. Her mouth was curled into a smile that spread from ear to ear.
"Is there a problem, sir?"
She spoke in a calm voice. I stumbled backwards, nearly falling over before running without looking back. I kept on running, and running until I tripped over and crashed onto the soft, dark carpet. I looked back and noticed that I tripped on a bottle, the same one that the flight attendant had given me before I fell asleep. What does she want from me? I thought as I slowly got up and looked behind me for the first time. Thankfully, she had not followed me, and I was all alone in the cabin. I looked around and pondered on what I should do. I had no way out. The curtain to the next cabin ahead of me fluttered, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The flight attendant came out from behind the curtain.
"Is there a problem, sir?"
I stuttered as I slowly backed away. I hit into a solid object. I turned around and came face to face with the same flight attendant again.
"Is there a problem, sir?"
I looked back, and suddenly all the seats were full. They were all twins of the same flight attendant.
"Is there a problem, sir?"
Their voices echoed through the whole cabin. Their voices shook me to the very core. I ran to the next cabin quickly and noticed that the cabin too was filled with the flight attendants. I continued running until I found myself facing an exit door. The flight attendants were following me. I can hear the drumming of their footsteps. I quickly opened the heavy door by turning the wheel. I would rather jump off this plane than face them. The door opened and I was sucked into the blackness of the sky. It was cold. The chill creeped into my bones and into my very soul. I continued falling in the dark sky through the clouds. I waited for my horrible death. I waited for the moment I would hit the ground at my terminal velocity and break all the bones in my body. I waited for those short few moments of immense pain. I started to remember what had happened before this predicament, how I had gotten myself into that mess. The memory of me boarding the plane played in my mind. I saw myself about to fall asleep, and then suddenly, I find it hard to describe, but it's like I just jumped into that memory, like being sucked into it. I was back in my plane seat. My body was still cold, and I could still feel the wind rustling in my hair as I fell. Slowly, the feelings of me free-falling subsided, and I could feel the cabin once again. I was transported back to the time just before I'd fallen asleep. Needless to say, I didn't fall asleep this time. A couple of agonizingly fearful hours later, the plane had finally landed, and I was ecstatic to feel the ground again. I had thought up until then that it was just a dream. It was just a nightmare induced by my fear of flying. However, what happened just as I departed from the plane makes me doubt that. See that same flight attendant that was standing at the door? When I first got on the plane, she was there again wishing us farewell. And when I passed in front of her, she said something that made chills run up my spine to this day.
Is there a problem, sir?
I quickly ran out of the flight. I pushed past everyone. I safely got home. I wouldn't be typing this story just because of a scary flight, though. I'm posting this story because I saw the same flight attendant again today. She's right outside my window. I can't escape my room. No matter how many times I pass through the door, it always leads back to my bedroom. She's been staring at me as I type this post. I don't think my window can hold her back. Hey guys, if you like what you just heard, then don't forget to give the video a like and let me know what you thought in the comments below. Read every single one and it helps out the channel immensely. And if you'd like to see more videos just like this, be sure to subscribe and remember to hit that notification bell to get notified on the latest videos. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.